So, I want you to imagine this. We are 500 miles or so from the front lines in Ukraine. We're in a sea that, rightly or wrongly, most people probably can't point to on a map. And yet, Ukraine has just blown up a tanker. Not Russian, Iranian. Indeed, this is not by accident. It's not a miscalculation. It's very deliberately, it's very public, and with Zelensky announcing it himself on the eve of his meeting with Donald Trump at the White House, no less. So if you think that this is just another strike in a long list of strikes, then you have missed the point. You've missed what Ukraine has just done and could well be doing more of. This is not necessarily a military operation. It's a message sent to three audiences simultaneously. Firstly, to Iran. Second, to Russia. But arguably, in the eyes of some, most importantly, to Trump. The message is this, that Russia and Iran are not separate problems anymore. They are the same problem. And Ukraine has just proved it with this drone strike on a ship in the Caspian Sea, which may well begin a huge shift in not just the war in Ukraine or the war in Iran, but both of them simultaneously, and with everyone else affected too. Let's get into it.
This is the Global Gambit.
How you going, everyone? So, welcome back to the channel. I had another video in mind, but given the past couple of days, this rather random but also remarkable set of developments between Ukraine, Iran, and so on, I thought proved worth a video. Not because of what it means going forward, but because it could be the start of a lot more to come. Not pretending to know that, but indeed that's the purpose of this video. So do keep watching to the end, and of course let me know in the comments what you guys think. Now, crucial to understand that on July 25th, Ukraine's security service struck this Iranian commercial vessel in the Caspian Sea. An Iranian sailor was killed, several have been injured, and the ship, it was carrying supposedly military cargo between Iran and Russia. It then exploded significantly, proving that there was, and it sank. The Caspian Sea, let that sink in for a moment. Ukraine is fighting a war along a 1,200-kilometer front line in eastern and southern Ukraine. It is, of course, simultaneously now striking across Moscow refineries, fuel depots, and further into over 17 plus oblasts. Naval assets in the Black Sea and Crimea are looking increasingly vulnerable as well. But now, for the first time in this war of over 4 years, or 14, depending upon how you look at it, this is a new front, the Caspian Sea. But this is why the Caspian Sea matters beyond the surprise of it. Since Iran's conflict with the United States disrupted the Strait of Hormuz, the Caspian Sea has become Iran's primary alternative route for moving goods and, of course, military equipment, fuel, and so on. The strait closure forced Iran to reroute its most sensitive cargo through the Caspian. It has become, in its own way for the Russians, a lifeline for Iran, the one route that still worked when everything else was being watched, sanctioned, or intercepted. Now Ukraine has just struck that lifeline. And this is, of course, not symbolic disruption for one ship. It is a warning to Iran that the route it has been depending on since Hormuz was closed in the past few months is no longer safe. That there is effectively no corridor. Not the Gulf, not the Strait, not the Caspian. That it is at least beyond Ukrainian reach. And that's why we've seen such an immediate and vehemently angry response from Tehran. The Iranians are pretty selective and crafty, savvy when it comes to diplomatic communiques, as those of you who watch my Iranian coverage will know. So the fact that they respond like this, like a lashing out, sort of like Putin does, it is indicative that this has rattled them in a way that they were not expecting nor ready for. So that's why I think there's a lot more to come. Let's stop here as well, because there is a detail that is significant about drones that I want to bring your attention to. We have been treating this Russo-Ukrainian war and the US-Iran conflicts as two separate theatres, two separate sets of weapons, two separate military supply chains. Now that framework is wrong, and perhaps those of you more clued in will know that the Iranians have been supplying the Russians with intelligence and support over drone usage in the first couple of years of this war. The Russians have since taken the Shahed drones and refined them, and the Russians have been providing satellite support, imagery, etc. to the Iranians in the past few months. But those are still relatively separate actions. What could happen now with this striking of the tanker by Ukraine is a increase of integration. Iran gives those Shahed drones, and Russia fits them with the more powerful jet engines. It upgrades the weapon design for one war and repurposes it for another. Russia then sends them back to Iran for use against American forces in the Gulf. This is the incremental escalation and integration that we've seen in the past few months. The same drones that rain down on Ukrainian cities, therefore, for the past several years, are being upgraded and used increasingly to target American sites and bases across the Middle East. So, in the eyes of some, this is not two separate wars anymore. This is an integrated military cooperation running across two theaters, with the Ukrainians and Americans as the collective targets, and Moscow and the Iranians as the coordinators for both. Moreover, Ukraine didn't just strike a tanker, it struck the artery connecting both these wars. By doing so publicly, by announcing it, by putting Zelensky's name on it, him as the face, Ukraine has forced that connection into the open in a way that no diplomatic briefing or intelligence report could have achieved, hence the vehement response by Tehran. But there's also an intelligence element to this, that the tanker strike was only half of the Zelensky's efforts this week, because alongside it, he disclosed something that has received almost no coverage relative to the strike. Russia has been providing Iran with this satellite imagery it's needed. Now, I mentioned that before, but that was more in a reactive sense. Now Russia is providing proactive imagery capable of allowing Tehran to directly and more coordinatedly target specific sites within American bases. This is not occasional either, it's very systematic. Since the beginning of this month, Russian satellites monitoring US military facilities and Gulf state air bases, and the imagery, all of that going to Tehran, has increased multiple fold. Before Iranian strikes, during preparation, after attacks to assess the damage inflicted. All of this very, very specifically done. For July 19th and 20th alone, for example, 4 air bases fell within the observation range of Russian satellites, 2 in Bahrain, 1 in Jordan, and 1 in Kuwait. The correlation, therefore, between Russian satellite surveillance and subsequent Iranian airstrikes on those same facilities is, at least in Zelensky's words, very clear, and it's what we call in the business horizontal escalation. The Iranians are increasing their amount of strikes across American bases without necessarily increasing the quantity of missiles or types of ammunition used. But let me put this as plainly as possible. Russia, which is not officially at war with the United States, is providing targeting intelligence to Iran, which is actively at war with the United States, to help it strike American military installations in the Gulf. American soldiers are being killed in facilities that Putin has helped Iran identify and target. That is not support for an ally. That is active participation in these sorts of attacks. And while Trump negotiates with both Moscow and Tehran as if they are sort of independent actors pursuing separate agendas, well, again, it is a plausible argument to say that these are not independent. They are coordinated, and Ukraine's attack has somewhat amplified that. Now, I remain on the fence as to whether or not we can say that this is a single war and that it's all interconnected. I had a debate with someone just on the show the other day about this. I remain skeptical about how much the Ukrainians can somehow pull the Americans into the conflict in Ukraine because of what's happening in Iran. And I also think it's delicate to say that the Russians are targeting Americans when the Americans have started this war. The Trump administration has started this war of choice. So depending upon who you ask, you could point the finger at someone else. Now, as always, Trump seems to be behind the times, behind the curve, treating the Iran war and the Ukraine war as two separate problems requiring two separate solutions. His instinct is, of course, the presumptuous ascension of wind down both, cut deals, declare victory and move on. He's the peacemaker president, end of forever wars. Of course, he can end the conflict that he unnecessarily started in January in the case of Iran, and the one that he's been able to do in 24 hours in the case of Ukraine, of course. Sarcasm aside, Zelensky needed him to understand that these are the same problem, which again is, I think, why he's so public about it. That Russia and Iran are coordinating against his interests, American interests, on both conflicts simultaneously. That helping Ukraine is therefore not charity. It is a direct contribution to America's own security because Russia is actively helping the country currently targeting American bases. The tanker strike was proof of concept to some. The satellite intelligence disclosure was the evidence package to others. And Zelensky walking into the White House and laying bare both of these on the table today, that's another. That this is not a supplicant, so to speak, asking for aid. That it is an ally, of course, which the United States has now signed a significant drone agreement with, demonstrating operational capability and sharing actionable military and intelligence. The entire framing of this relationship, Ukraine is dependent, America as benefactor has shifted. Ukraine is the proactive one, demonstrating to America it needs them and why it's in their interests to support them more than Trump has been in the past year in the war against Putin. But there's another detail that makes this impossible for Trump to ignore. Ukraine has been sending its own military personnel to the Gulf, of course, to help intercept Iranian Shahed drones, the same drones Iran received from Russia, upgraded and turned against American targets. Ukraine is literally helping defend American forces against Putin's weapons he gives back to Iran. If that doesn't change the terms of the conversations in Washington, nothing will. And I'll be very interested to see what comes out of their conversation earlier today. Keep a lookout on the channel for my coverage of that. Now, what the responses, of course, reveal. I've alluded to the Iranian one a couple of times, but let's unpack it a little bit more. Iran's foreign minister called the strike a violation of the UN Charter. It can't go unanswered. Ukrainian's Shah d'Affaires was summoned, Shah d'Affaires being the second in command when you don't have a full-fledged ambassador to the country. Now, Iran accused Israel of provoking. Very interesting incorporation of them. Notice what Iran did not address, though. The military cargo, the drone supply chain, the reason the ship was in the Caspian in the first place. Iran called the vessel commercial and the attack criminal, without explaining what military cargo a commercial vessel was carrying between two countries officially not at war with each other. Russia offered condolences. Lavrov expressed sympathy. But neither Moscow nor Tehran addressed the satellite intelligence disclosure, the evidence that Russia is providing targeting data for strikes on American military installations. The silence on the substance is the response, therefore. When you cannot address the accusation, you attack the accuser. Iran accused Ukraine of irrationality. Russia expressed sorrow, but neither said a word about this ship and what it was carrying, or why Russian satellites are surveilling American bases just before Iran strikes them. That silence, in the eyes of many, is therefore a confession. Indeed, as we know from Putin, when his back is up against the wall, when things look particularly bleak, he goes mute. And I think that's pretty evident of the situation between these two. Whether rightly or wrongly, Ukraine should have struck that war because of the potential negative feedback loop and escalation it leads to with Iran. But the point is that 500 miles from this front line, in a sea that people can't point to, a drone strike has taken out a ship and potentially set a slippery slope, a set of dominoes between two of the most consequential war fronts of the modern age. Ukraine just made it impossible, therefore, to pretend that these are increasingly separate, perhaps totally integrated at this point, wars. It, of course, all depends on what Trump does and whether or not it makes a difference in the continuation and sustainability of either front. But we'll have to see. I encourage you to stay tuned for such an event and coverage from me. But that's it. If you enjoyed the video, everyone, then of course do subscribe. Do like the video. It's free, but really helps. And I'll see you tomorrow and the next days for an update and, of course, my latest interviews with all the top tier guests that we have on the Global Gambit. Speak soon.